Drugs and human trafficking going north, and you can see the border counties as laid out. We shared a border with 1,254 miles with Mexico. 14 counties are contiguous with Mexico. Now, the slide is to just bring to everyone's attention, we got 5 U.S. Border Patrol sectors in Texas. And since our mission and strategic guidance is to provide direct support to Border Patrol, it's important to see what those are. And the key piece to this one is the legislature well knows, this committee knows, is that the overwhelming amount of trafficking is occurring through the Rio Grande Valley. This is the 2014 numbers, and as you can see, 53% of the total apprehensions, not just for Texas, but for the nation, is occurring in the Rio Grande Valley. And at the same point, 34.1% of the marijuana and cocaine seizures across the nation. The next has to do with what we've looked at in terms of smuggling, if you will, corridors and priorities. At the end of the day, you got to prioritize. And rather than allocating resources and diverting resources from across the state to send it to areas in the state that have a lower priority in terms of smuggling, we sent those resources to where the most critical areas, and that's Starr and Hidalgo County, based upon the numbers I just provided you. And we consider it, I'm going to move this along for the rest of the, okay? These 14 counties right here, and they range, and we base this based on both the human smuggling and also drug trafficking in those areas. And this is something that the department came up with. Now, the next slide, and then before I get to this, right here, I think it was important for the department when we're asking us to come back with measures and metrics and what we're doing and on border control and amplifying security is to take a look at what the federal government is using right now or has been using. And also another part that we did is at this point is I took it upon ourselves, always looking for expertise, is there's someone that I've observed and worked with or around and seen as an expertise I view in this area in terms of assessing performance in these issues, and there's no question he's an expert in my mind. I've got a great deal of respect for him, and I sought his assistance to help us. We're not afraid to ask and help in this situation. And the former state auditor, John Keel, I went to John and asked him if he would. He volunteered his services, no cost to the state, and did a lot of research and provided a lot of guidance and a little expertise that really helped us shape this of what we're talking about. Because really we're doing a paradigm shift here. We're moving from counting things that are more activities and less outcomes. And if you look at the federal requirements over the last year, what they've done, whether it's optimum deterrence all the way to recidivism rate or effectiveness rate or a successful and authorized rate or just apprehension data. And there's one thing that's been true. It's all been people data. It hasn't been drug data, number one, in all of these particular areas. And they've been criticized for using this. DHS has been criticized by the Government Accounting Office and also the Congressional Services Research Offices and also a number of bipartisan task forces on these metrics. So using these metrics, when you look at it, and I'll use an example, effectiveness rate. Effectiveness rate is when you add the number of illegal apprehensions plus the number of turnbacks. That's those that they started to come and they were forced back. And you divide that by the number of illegal apprehensions plus turnbacks plus gotaways. And then you come up with an effectiveness rate. Of course, that's only the effectiveness rate of what you've seen, not what you haven't seen. So you come up with and then you set up as your goal at 0.80% or 0.80 is your effective rate goal that you want to achieve in the next biennium or the next session. Well, I can't come back and sell you that. You're not going to. There's no way that shows or correlates to whether we've increased the level of security or not. So. And so the recommended reporting plan, and you have the detailed 11-page document that we have, and as you know, and there's many experts out here that have this expertise and know about inputs and outcomes or outputs and activities and impacts and outcomes and all those things that figure in terms of how we assess programs and government operations and also internally in the private sector. And of course, data collection and reporting. And our theme has been this, very simple, is that because you don't know what data you need, collect it all. And as far as we're concerned, assess it all. And it's important to do that because you never know, what what data set or data element that matters. So it's important we capture that. And we've seen that, like it was important that for some members of the legislature to see what did DPS actually do. What's the granular? Don't commingle it, but let's disaggregate it. So it's important to break all of those things out, and that what you see in front of you is a list of all the things that we're collecting right now and reporting. And we make this very clear. There's only one data category that we don't report on this chart publicly, and that's the special interest aliens. Those are the aliens that are captured from countries with a high threat probability based on State Department identifying that there's a significant presence of terrorism in that country. That information belongs to Border Patrol. They treat it as sensitive, therefore we can't share that with the public in that regard. The other one, the state legislature recognized that the long-term use of a unified crime reporting index crime only gives you a distorted view of the criminal threat in Texas. You only get a small part of it. You don't get the smuggling and the organized crime part of it. It doesn't count corruption. When you go index crime, it doesn't count kidnapping, it doesn't count extortion, it doesn't count human trafficking, drug trafficking. Therefore, it doesn't count anything that matters when you talk about addressing smuggling, international smuggling and transnational crime. So what you did is said, well, hey, we're going to move and adopt the National Incident-Based Reporting System that counts everything. And again, we're back to counting everything. And eventually, when all agencies adopt that system, we'll be in a position not only to report everything across all jurisdictions, but even more in a more timely manner. And one of the vexing things from law enforcement when you're trying to look in statewide, when you recognize that crime and terrorism is cross-jurisdictional and patterns emerge, and how do you make sure you see the dots and see these moving trends, this will provide the visibility on the data that you can see cross-jurisdictional activity. And some of those things are predicate offenses for organized criminal activity. So we're very looking forward to when we get to that point. Right now, we don't have NIBRs in the border counties. We have right now index crime, with the exception of few agencies moving towards that. But we'll be prioritizing from a department standpoint and working with those agencies because to get the NIBRs data rolled out on the border counties and jurisdictions. The next category, and we're saying this is from a Texas standpoint, and we've shared this with our Border Patrol partners. We share everything with our Border Patrol partners. And we're at the same point, we've made it very clear that we know how they count it, but at the end of the day, we've got to count it in a different way. There's a greater expectation. We spend $800 million of Texas, hard-earned, taxpayer dollars. There's an expectation that we're going to provide a certain level of data. The supporting capabilities, detection coverage, and interdiction capacity. Those are the three essentials. If you start counting what matters. And we start looking at supporting capabilities, what is that? A unified command structure, clearly, at the local, state, and federal level. A centralized information intelligence production, collection and production. That's important to have a shared view of what's going on and to have an accurate view of what's going on. Radio communications, operability and interoperability. Operability means you can just talk. And there's places on the border you can't talk to anybody, even your own people, because of just how desolate it is. But it's also important that, if you don't have communications direct trooper to Border Patrol agent, that's a problem. Or deputy to Border Patrol agent or deputy to trooper, that's a problem when you're trying to do unified operations. A coordinated Government of Mexico patrol operations. We want to see the Government of Mexico conduct, patrol operations in northern Mexico, because I can assure you that disrupts, cartel activity. So we would like to see that, and of course, just because we'd like to see it doesn't mean we're going to get it. But at the same point, that's a very important key piece to this thing, and we think that can be done. Integrated detection and technologies interdiction assets. It's a fancy word. It just means simply, when I say integrated, is that, for example, you paid for the cameras. Those cameras have geo-coordinates, GPS coordinates. You get an immediate image when it goes off. Well, there's no reason that can't be integrated into our helicopters, into our mid-level altitude aircraft, and our high-level altitude aircraft that are patrolling the airs. So they get the immediate image, but not just ours, the cameras, but also the Border Patrol sensors. So you can put eyes on it. So now we're using technology in a way that it hasn't been used before, and we're using it in a way we can track not just in terms of our detection assets and what they do and what they see, but what we do in response to that. Because we, in Department of Public Safety, all of our vehicles and our individual units have Blue Force tracking, meaning that we track every unit. We know where it's at. and can see it. And they can see themselves where they're at and where they are juxtapositioned to cameras and to other colleagues in that regard. So we've got both in that regard. So we're talking about supporting capabilities. We talked about a stacked and redundant, overlapping approach in terms of detection coverage. Starts on the river. Got to get on the river. And you put us in a position to be able to do that, and we do it aggressively with our game warden partners, very important partners with us when you get on the river. And the next level is the sensors, as you see in that chart. After the sensors, you'll see that we've got towers. And they call them the raid towers, Border Patrol towers. And then after the towers, you see aerostats. Aerostats are a great force multiplier as well. And what that does, it provides a view shed right on the Rio Grande River. And that's important. And you'll see in some of the metrics that we're looking at is that the more of the river you see, the better off you are. And I think you're well aware that Governor Abbott has requested Jay Johnson, the Secretary of Homeland Security, for an additional 5 aerostats. And I can assure you Border Patrol agents want those there as much as we do to be able to increase that view shed. On top of that, then comes the helicopters that you paid for. All right, state of the art. We have FLIR capability. And that's an important piece on that vertical stack. Then the Caravan is our mid-level altitude that also is equipped with an MX-15. It has it's a fancy word for meaning it has the same FLIR and observation optical standoff optical capability as the helicopters. And then we have our Pilatus, which is the high-level altitude, and that completes the stack. We did throw in there a Predator on top of that because has been at times that the Predator's been available to use, and of course it's always a value added. They're very expensive, and of course right now I think there's a limitation on their use right now. But we certainly would enjoy or appreciate having more of those things. And the next slide that we get into is really just a detection interdiction capacity map. And it's very simple. And this is actually taken off of, this is not actual data on purpose because we're making it public, but it is an actual slide not unlike we will see and that we work with on a weekly basis when we're trying to adjust operations in a zone, because we've talked about securing it zone by zone, county by county, and knowing where our detection capability is, and that includes sensors, that includes cameras, as you can see the dots right there, and then overlaying on top of that, okay, the different assets that we have. Now the advantage we have, because the sea change here is that, and I don't know why this hasn't been obvious, as obvious as it is that what we're doing is we're actually using measurement tools that exist as a result of technology. GPS is there. That's geolocate. We have those locations and coordinations. We know where our units are in that regard. We even have that on our boats, and we have it on our aircraft. So at any given time, we can go back and lay down what that landmark looks like, what that field, that view shed looks like at any given time, including the aerostats, which is shared with our Border Patrol partners, share with us. The next slide has to do with the operating environment. And this has been the challenge. When you start looking at it in terms of how you measure, well, how many troopers, how many Cortina units, how many Border Patrol agents, how many deputy sheriffs, how many game wardens per acre do you need to be able to secure the Texas-Mexico border? We can't tell you that. What we can tell you is that, and what we've looked at and reflected on numbers, response time is a good way to be able to discern whether you have enough resources in that area or not. And based upon, the operating environment. And I say the operating environment, some things work for us, some things work for the cartels. I can tell you when there's a presence of wall or fencing or road infrastructure that's right along the river, that helps law enforcement. The presence of POE, the port of entry infrastructure, that helps law enforcement in that area because there's more infrastructure, makes it more difficult for the cartels to quickly infiltrate Texas. Citizen support. That's a big benefactor that helps us in law enforcement side. The cartels, we got to account for these things in every zone. Every zone is different. I can assure you, securing Brewster County is a lot different than securing, Starr County in terms of the layout, where you have smuggling peninsulas and islands, where you have Carrizo Cane and Salt Cedar, as dense as it is, federal and state park refuge areas, because when you have one of these refuge areas, there's no road infrastructure for Border Patrol to use or others to use. It may take an hour to go around to be able to get to where you need that you've detected, because you can't go through. close proximity of highways to the river that works against us when there's housing right on top of it, smuggling infrastructure. And I say infrastructure because one of the things you've asked us to address is that not just in terms of the smuggling across, but the infrastructure that supports it. And plaza bosses have that infrastructure on our side of the border, and they use corruption to be able to support their smuggling activities. So it's how we're postured to be able to address those things. Cartels' efforts to corrupt drainage systems, Carrizo Cane, low water levels in certain areas certainly work for the cartels. The next might be a little bit different. And what we're, based on the guidance we received from the Legislative Oversight Committee, we've talked about before in the Governor's office, and in our discussions with the Speaker's office, Lieutenant Governor's office, we've talked about this, about the change here is actually to count things. And you can see that these are descriptive words on the first one: limited or no, partial, effective, and overlapping, to be able to assess us. Where are we at? Where are we in a particular zone? I think we ought to be able to do that, because anything at any given time, something's observable and something's that you can see, you ought to be able to distinguish different levels or delineate different levels of it. And so that's what we've done here. But we said to make it harder on ourselves, because frankly, it's a lot easier if we just sit back in what's been done for the last couple of decades. We can just roll off the river a little bit and just start picking up stats, running up stats. Drug seizures. We do more seizures when we get off the river and move it back, and we can start running up those numbers. And they can come back next sessions. Look at all the numbers that we've produced. But that doesn't increase the level of security. But there's certain things that we ought to be accountable for, and we ought to be able to grade how we've done in every county. Now we're doing it. Our proposal like this is to do it by zone. Each zone that we grade. There's 85 zones across Texas. But again, zones is information that's particular to Border Patrol, and we can't share what their zones look like. What we can share is what the county looks like. And there's like 5 zones within Starr County, and we can report back the level of security that we've achieved in Starr County, or what the level is that we have in Webb County, or in Brewster County, or in El Paso County for that level, for that matter. This is the description. The next one is the details. It's just one thing saying, partial or no and substantial. Another thing is to actually, what are those things? And there are certain things you have to have, or you just can't make that next level. And as you can see, reliable, interoperable communications. If that doesn't exist, then you're not going to get to the operational level. It doesn't matter all the other things that you're doing. And the same thing, if your effectiveness rate, if it's not greater than 80% on your detection coverage, then you can't be at the operational level. As you can see as it goes on along those lines. And these things that can be documented and counted. We've got an access spreadsheet on the next page that shows you an example of, by checking the block, this is not hard. Do you have it or don't you have it? And if you have anything that is at a minimal level, it means you're stuck at the minimal level. You may have other things that will put you at operational control, but if you have any one of those categories at minimal level, you don't move to that next level. The next thing I want to do is that, of course, we talk about activities, outcomes, outputs, and then there comes a point, impacts. And that's one of the things we said, collect all and measure all. And I know that I've talked to some members here about, we've talked about the price of drugs. I mean, other things that we can see that, or either natural experiments or data sets that we can see that we might be able to see what type of impact that we're having. Because one thing to demonstrate the level of security, well, what did you do? What does that mean? And then from that, you're in a position to be able to have the data to sit back and, well, what's the return on investment? We spent this much to get this level of security, and we've seen this much impact. Is it worth continuing in that regard? And this next slide right here is Operation Secure Texas. You can see the Operation Secure Texas mission area is obviously Hidalgo and Starr County. The data used for this was provided by the El Paso Intelligence Center, which is run by the Drug Enforcement Administration. We didn't know that they were collecting this data, but they collect it border-wide for 150 miles for local, state, and federal agencies. And an analytical question came out, why is there's been certain parts of Texas where drugs have been dramatically decreasing. And of course, when you look at the data and you see across the southwest border, well, It happens to be the exact area that we're conducting operations. And as you can see, a 26.8% reduction in Starr County, 28.9% reduction in Hidalgo County, and importantly, the counties behind them, okay, which have traditionally had a 90% reduction in Jim Hogg County. And Brooks County, I want to bring that to your attention because that's where we have a Border Patrol inspection port inland. It's 62 miles off the border. That's Falfurrias right there. So that checkpoint is 60% reduction. In Kennedy County, the same thing, a 73% reduction. That's where the other checkpoint is. At the same time, you can see what's happened is, as we've increased, okay, the drugs are expanding, westward and eastward. We're hammered. Cameron County is getting hammered, an increase of 25%, and the same thing in Zapata and Webb County. So, and so that's an example of impact data. Is there other data? Well, if we went back and looked at the OBS data we've collected on the next slide here, and say, well, hey, what have we seen as it relates to drugs and value of drugs? And looked at the first quarter of 2014 to the first quarter of 2016. And you see, for the first time ever, and we're very pleased about this because Rio Grande Valley has just been hammered with drugs, is where it's getting closer to where Laredo sector is almost at the same level. And it's been a 50% reduction in the Rio Grande Valley, but even though Laredo is at a 25% reduction, we're still seeing where Rio Grande Valley seizures are going down in the area of operation that we've been operated in. The next one is legal alien apprehensions by sector. There's been much talk, and I think, Mr. Chairman, we talked about this yesterday, about concerns about there's going to be a dramatic increase that we're going to see. We've been hearing that from the Secretary, and we've been hearing that from our federal partners for a year now, that this is going to happen, it's going to happen. It may have happened, and we may be on the upswing. You never know where you start going upwards, because we're going upwards right now. We've dropped, and we're going back upwards. So we're not really in a position, because that January drop obviously is the holiday season where you normally see that drop, and it's going up right now. We can't tell you, but we can't tell you that it's still substantially lower than 2014 when you directed us to stem the flow of drug trafficking and human smuggling in the Rio Grande Valley. And the numbers are right there. The last one I'm always reluctant to do, because we're not claiming, and we're very careful. And first of all, I want to very clear, DPS is not claiming credit for anything. Any credit that deserved is, resources have been provided, directions have been provided, and we work with everyone else, by the way. So it's a team sport, if you will. But we've got chiefs of police down there kept telling me, sending notes, sending letters, hey, crime rate's down, crime rate's down, crime rate's down. Things are better. Operation Strong Safety, Operation Secure Texas, whether it's Chief Dominguez, whether it's Chief Rodriguez. And, of course, so we go back and look at the uniform crime reporting data. Now, as you know, that's one of the challenges of uniform crime report data. It takes forever to get. And when you do get it, it's usually inadequate right now because it's not NIBRS, but we did look at it and prioritized the border area for the reasons that we've talked about, to have numbers that we can report back to you. And clearly what the chiefs have been saying is correct. I mean, there has been a drop in crime in those areas. 18.1% in Starr County and 12.26% in Hidalgo County. Is it causal? I'm not going to say causal. It's corollary. It happens. There's certainly a correlation to it. And the reason I'm not ready to say causal, because many of the crimes that we're talking about aren't reflected in these numbers. Really, the success is far more than what these numbers show, because the numbers that we've impacted on are the NIBRS numbers, the trafficking numbers, and not the smuggling numbers, and not necessarily index crime. But there is a correlation, and we hear that from the chiefs of police, and we do see it in these numbers. But I want to put this in context, and you've also seen the other part of that is that the area that we're not operating in, the decreases are substantially less, and sometimes they dramatically increases. In Zapata County, you can see a 67% increase. Cameron, only a 1.4% decrease. And I want to remind you the law of large numbers, though, when you look at Zapata County, is it doesn't take many, one way or another, to shift things. It could be, it could be a decrease in the next biennium, can be a substantial decrease just by the elimination of 5 crimes. So you got to be careful about these numbers and how you use these numbers in that regard. The last then is it's a perfect example of, okay, obviously, I'll have to scroll through this pretty quickly here. I hope you're not grading my homework. Okay, there we go. This slide right here is, we just pull, again, it's looking at why you got to collect everything and look at everything. One of the challenges we've saw early on, and things I've heard from the sheriffs in the coastal bend area, has been about bailouts and from ranchers, okay, and farmers, that when you get in these, the first thing to do when they have a load of drugs or people, particularly, is that they'll run from law enforcement, go right through the fences, so they can separate them. The Kaidu can separate himself, okay, from those being smuggled into the country, and then try to move back and get away. Well, there's a lot of vandalism involved. There's certainly a public safety concern in terms of these high-speed, 100-mile-an-hour pursuits with 10s and 15s and 20 people in these vehicles, and so it's a concern to local law enforcement in the coastal bend. And of course, the whole point in the direction you've given us is to focus between the ports of entry on the border, not directly on the border. And you look at in terms of impacts, and you see that bailouts in the coastal bend area, which has always been a problem, have been on the decrease. And that's a good impact. It's just one of many, but it's certainly an impact. And we're mindful and try to work closely with the South Texas Property Association and try to keep in touch with those landowners down there that can tell you, is life better or is it not? The quality of life, do they feel safer? Because as you made it very clear, and we all recognize that every Texan has a right to live, free of fear and safety on their land. And clearly, the cartels would contest that. The gangs that support them would contest that, and you made it clear that in Texas, we don't give up a square inch of Texas to anybody.